Hello, all. Welcome to today's webinar on developing a procrastination action plan brought to you by the Academic Resource Center at Georgetown University. Feel free to add any questions to the chat while we're going through and discussing, but let's get to learning some strategies. You may be wondering what a procrastination action plan is. This is basically a list of steps to get you back on track. This is a concrete resource that you can use, create, and develop to essentially be a plan of attack for when you are stuck in a procrastination loop. These are these deep periods of being distracted where you can see yourself not doing what you're supposed to do, but you just can't walk away from those distractions. The idea with a procrastination action plan is that it's a list of steps that you are going to create when you aren't distracted so that it's ready to enact when you are distracted. Right now, we're thinking about this, we're focused, so it makes sense to determine what your plan can be for when you need it at a future date. So, a few things that you should figure out before you're distracted. One is, where can you keep your action plan so that it's easy to access? For example, if you write out a well-developed action plan and you keep it somewhere tucked away that is maybe highly organized, but not a place you're going to remember or see when you are in one of these heavy procrastination loops, that might not be the most helpful tool. Another question to ask yourself, how can you create physical or digital reminders to look at your action plan? Are you someone that when you're stuck procrastinating heavily, you don't realize it? How can you create some sort of visual cues to remind yourself that you have a potential plan? And then how can you write out your action steps clearly so that they can be executed simply? The idea is that we're going to discuss how to develop almost a to-do list of very, very simple steps to help you break out of procrastination. And the idea is that they should be as simple as possible so that this plan is as easy to execute as possible. One note in terms of how can you create these visual cues is think about what you might be doing or where you might be when you are needing to break free from a procrastination loop. It can be helpful to identify your biggest form of procrastination and aim to keep your action plan in that list. So if you are a chronic phone scroller, make sure you have a digital copy of your checklist in your phone somewhere. It could be in the Notes app. You could make it the background of your phone screen. That way you can be in that procrastination space and still have an outlet to break free from it. If you are a snacker, maybe keep a list on the fridge. If you are big into gaming, put a post-it on your device. Essentially, you want to try to create some sort of visual cue to help you so that you're not totally reliant on just your brain to push yourself into executing this action plan. So, step one of your action plan should be to begin doing a secondary activity. And what that activity will be will depend a lot on what is going to work for you individually. Often, we have trouble breaking out of procrastination loop because of all or nothing thinking. We have this mentality of, if I'm going to start working, that means I have to stop procrastinating forever. And because we don't want to stop procrastinating, we extend it indefinitely. Instead of just taking a quick break to work, we say, well, I'll start working forever and I'll be the perfect student after I watch one more TikTok and then one more and then one more. And eventually that one more extends into another hour. So a key part for this first step is to, instead of that all or nothing thinking, to begin to wean yourself off of the procrastination and know that you can go back to it. Just because you can't get everything done doesn't mean you should get nothing done. So the idea is that you're going to take little breaks from your procrastination, but you're going to come back to it. Another reason we often go into that system of like one more TikTok, one more video is that we are getting positive reinforcement from our procrastination source. And when we begin working, that is replacing it with negative reinforcement. So instead of going directly from our procrastination activity to our study work or task that we're putting off, instead, we're going to move to a safer third activity that is still going to provide you with some positive reinforcement. So you aren't going to stop your procrastination activity. Instead, you are going to introduce a new secondary procrastination activity. We're having trouble leaving the original procrastination, TikTok will say, because you have this urgency addiction where there are these predictable sensations from your procrastinating. You're getting these short-term temporary dopamine hits. And the negative stress from not doing a task is easier to stomach than the stress of doing the work itself. And so that stress of being behind absorbs the negative sensations that would be created by doing the actual task. So if it were so easy to just stop procrastinating and do your work, you would have already done it. Instead of trying to remove the positive stimulus to focus on a negative stimulus, we're going to introduce a second but less compelling positive stimulus. So the idea is that we're going to introduce a secondary procrastination activity that is less addictive or something you can multitask while doing. So how should this look on your action plan? It can be most helpful to list out several activities that you could jump in and out of while also doing an academic assignment. So basically, the first piece of your procrastination action plan should be a list of your alternate, safer, secondary procrastination activities. Some potential activities: cleaning, drawing, exercising, puzzles, a quick walk, drinking water, maybe a less intense homework assignment if you have a literature class and you enjoy those assignments. That could be it. Instrument practice, listening to music. It's helpful to be as specific as possible because it'll make it easier to jump into that. For example, listening to music, there's a decision-making component that could be challenging, but if you say, I want to listen to this specific album, that will make it easier to just do it. Treat it like a to-do list. You see the instruction, you follow it. It's also good to write out a few potential activities to give your tired brain options. Also, for example, if you only have drinking water, that's going to be difficult to come back to once you have had 3 glasses of water. So determining what these activities could be and writing them out, not just having them floating around in your head, but creating that physical list is going to be a great first step. That leads us into action plan step 2, which is setting up your workspace. So, what should your workspace look like? Basically, before you are actually working, you can take the step of just setting up whatever technology, supplies, or devices you need in your space in order to do an assignment. It can seem really daunting to sit down and write a 5-page paper, but it can be significantly less daunting to get out your laptop and put out your notebook, and that's it. So treat this development of your workspace as its own introductory step to leaving your procrastination loop. In terms of setting that space up, you can physically prepare it even to the point of turning to a page in a book or finding the section you need to pick up on. You could even write out on a post-it note or on a document your next steps of what you need to do for that task. So you could write out next step, read through notes, step after that, outline paper, step after that, write first paragraph. But again, this step of setting up your workspace is essentially a transition. It's going to help you move from this one space that's totally not work related to at least getting a little bit closer. But this basic setup step is not as intense as doing the work itself, especially if you know you can set up your computer and then go back to taking a break. This moves us into our third step, which will be to begin working for brief periods of time. And for this, I really do mean brief periods of time. A lot of times, again, we have that all or nothing thinking. I need to write a paper, so I'm going to stop procrastinating and sit down and write 5 pages. Instead, you want to begin by working towards small, specific goals that can take very, very small amounts of time. And how small those little time blocks are depends on how badly you're procrastinating. So if you need to read 50 pages, that's what you're putting off. A great way to start is to just set a timer for 5 minutes and read 1 page. And that's all you need to do. Just begin. Maybe that's too much. Maybe you set a 2-minute timer and you read 1 paragraph. Maybe that's too much. Maybe you set a 1-minute timer and you read 1 sentence. This is beneficial in having these super small specific goals because it gets you over the barrier of beginning. And often, if you are someone who's a chronic procrastinator, beginning a task can be the hardest part, is getting your mentality into this task you don't want to do. And it's a lot easier once you've begun. The component of the timer can be helpful because sometimes having that external structure of I have to read 1 sentence within the next minute can really create a source of pressure that will actually make you do this. That gets into this idea of external versus internal accountability. If you're a chronic procrastinator, you probably rely solely on your internal structures in order to get yourself to work. You're waiting for yourself to tell yourself to work. And bringing in timers and even writing out these lists of steps, having those external factors is a way to create an external source of accountability so that you're not relying solely on yourself and your own motivation to help yourself move forward. So that's why timers can be helpful in terms of switching into work mode. So when we are using timers to complete a work block, basically you set a brief timer. You might, if you're procrastinating, first set a timer and begin doing a procrastination activity first. And then when the timer goes off, set another one and go back to your original procrastination activity. If you are even having trouble beginning your alternate procrastination activity, use these brief timers to just get involved in something a little more boring, but that's maybe going to make it easier to start working. We're playing with a traditional timer method here. That's the Pomodoro method. And this is not what we're using as part of this, but I wanted to go over this in case you're curious how we traditionally see study timers being implemented. The Pomodoro method, how this works is you set a timer for 25 minutes, work for 25 minutes, and then you set a 5-minute timer and take a 5-minute break. And you do that after 4 cycles, or about 2 hours, you take a 15-minute break. But this is the most classic way of alternating between work blocks and breaks, work blocks and breaks. And often folks find that they can work for longer because they're working in these regular breaks. What we're working with for the procrastination action plan is using a modified Pomodoro, where we're not going with these longer 25-minute work blocks. We are using smaller time increments. So if you're having trouble even starting your new procrastination activity, you are currently watching Netflix and you are going to try to do the dishes instead. And then once you've done that, you're going to try to work, but you can't walk away from Netflix. Start by setting a 5-minute timer where all you're doing is working on the dishes, and then a 5-minute timer where you switch back to Netflix, then a 5 minutes to back to the dishes until you find that you can get rid of the Netflix and go toggle between doing the dishes and doing your assignment. If even that feels like too much, try 2-minute timers where maybe you're giving yourself that allowance to spend more time with your procrastination activity. So if I'm trying to stop watching Netflix and I want to do the dishes, I might set a 2-minute timer where I'm doing the dishes and then 5 minutes where I am watching Netflix. And then 2 minutes for dishes, then 2 minutes for Netflix, and then slowly increasing the new activity. Again, this is giving yourself this allowance to return to that procrastination activity is going to make it easier to move on to something else because you know you don't have to leave that space forever. And just beginning the new activity can often encourage you to leave the bigger procrastination source behind. So then that moves into action plan step 4, slowly decrease time spent procrastinating and increase time spent working. Choose specific goals for each time block so that you aren't just setting a timer and working for a little bit, but you can work through smaller specific goals and correlate times to how long you think they should take. So again, you want to start using smaller time blocks when you're starting because it's hard to start, and then give yourself specific goals for those smaller time blocks. So if I need to write a paper, I might start by just reading over the paper assignment and set a 2-minute timer, take a break. Then maybe I'll underline key parts of the assignment and set a 5-minute timer for that. Then if I want to move into 10-minute blocks, maybe I'll do 10 minutes for brainstorming, then a break, then 10 minutes for drafting my thesis, take a break. And then if I want to read over notes, maybe 15, and then gradually I'm getting up to these 20-minute time blocks. And I never need to make the time blocks bigger than that. I don't even need to go as big as 20 minutes. It's really about what can coax you into working more efficiently. So, when you have your final action plan, what exactly should this look like? Again, you want to make it a concrete, specific checklist of steps you can follow without having to think about them. And as I mentioned before, the idea is that you use your more active brain now to figure out the specific steps so that your future procrastinating self doesn't have to make those decisions because it will be harder for your future self. So here's what my potential action plan might look like. And this is an action plan that's more broad. I would like to make it more specific by naming the podcast at least or a certain episode, and maybe even making a playlist of procrastination podcast episodes that I save for this occasion. So, my first step, turn on a podcast from my procrastination playlist for 5 minutes. Then, after that, procrastinate for 5 minutes. In this scenario, the podcast is my new, less intense procrastination activity. Then I'm going to listen to the podcast for 2 minutes while writing out homework goals. So I'm going to figure out what I need to do specifically in terms of concrete tasks that will take 1 or 2 minutes. Then I'll procrastinate for 5 minutes. Then I will listen to my podcast and set up my workspace. And then I will work for 5 minutes. So this beginning process, it's going to be long to ease me into it with the trust that once I've begun working, I will be able to procrastinate less and work more. But again, that beginning part is the hardest step. If you have any questions about what we've talked about today, feel free to add them to the chat. Otherwise, thank you so much for your time today and good luck working on your own personal procrastination action plan.